Did you know that Taco Bell has tried twice before to crack it in the Australian market? So it begs the question, will it make it this time? And also more broadly, how many Mexican restaurants can the Australian market actually handle?
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
So the question is, will Taco Bell make it in the Australian market this time? And I think, in my personal opinion, it's a resounding yes, it will make it. And the reason for that, the two other times it's been here, 1981 and 1997, the Australian food palette of Mexican food certainly wasn't developed in any significant way. I mean, it wasn't until 1983 that we didn't even have Doritos in the country until 1983. So certainly a Mexican chain like Taco Bell certainly wasn't going to hit the ground running in our marketplace at that time. But to illustrate my point further, I identified three key areas and key points why I believe Taco Bell will make it and have a big impact in the Australian marketplace on this occasion. Firstly, there is now a very clear homegrown Australian Mexican food marketplace that's grown the opportunity for Taco Bell to move into that it didn't have before. Secondly, they'll be able to leverage a massive global brand. It's a global juggernaut of Mexican food, Taco Bell, with over 7,000 international stores. And now we have the internet and social media where they can really leverage and tell stories and connect the culture of the brand back to their American marketplace and globally where they've got a very big presence. That will help it hit in Australia. And thirdly, the key thing, probably the biggest thing I see is price point. We did our taco benchmark in 5 Mexican chains in the Australian marketplace, and we found that Taco Bell was basically half the price of the other homegrown Australian Mexican chains, and that is the thing that's really going to set it apart and open up a market opportunity here in Australia for it. So it begs the question, how many Mexican restaurants can the Australian market profitably handle? And I've done some calculations with my trusty little calculator here to give you an idea and some perspective and some context around how many it may be able to handle in our marketplace. Now, currently in the Australian marketplace, I've identified 5 of the major Mexican franchise chain brands, and they account for 450 odd locations through the Australian marketplace. Now, if you divide 450 by 25 million people in Australia, that gives you roughly 1 Mexican restaurant for every 55,000 people in Australia. And then let's look at the USA example, which obviously has, with its Mexican influence, a much higher latent demand for Mexican food in that country. Now, with 330 million odd people in America, I had a look there, and the top 14 franchised-only chains in America account for 13,100 odd Mexican restaurant outlets. If you divide that by 330 million people, you will then come up with a calculation of 1 Mexican restaurant for every 25,000 people in the US market. Now let's overlay over the top of those numbers there the growth aspirations of Australian Mexican restaurant chains. Guzman Y Gomez, who last year or in 2018 raised $44 million in capital for their growth aspirations, say they reckon they can get to 500 locations in Australia. Taco Bell are going for 100 locations in the Australian market by 2024. And we've got some other chains obviously still there. So if none of those other chains grow at all or go backwards, and Taco Bell and Guzman hit their growth targets, then we're going to have 897 Mexican restaurants in the Australian marketplace. And when we do the numbers again, we divide that into our population, we end up with a ratio of 1 Mexican restaurant to every 27,000 people, which is basically the same ratio as how many Mexican restaurants would be in the United States as well. Now, this is not at all an endorsement or guarantee of any brand in particular and their growth plans in the Australian marketplace. But the question you've got to ask yourself is, do we think that we want to eat that much Mexican in Australia? I'm not so sure. What do you think?